I agree with his. I agree with this view that the earliest Christians thought that it's from the grave up, and I think that they thought being raised from the dead does not mean you kind of hang around for 40 days or something like that. They didn't. The earliest Christians thought that the resurrection was also the exaltation. When he says when he refers, he sounds like he's referring to a term, resurrection, exaltation, as a single term. And of course, that's not in the Bible or anywhere. I think that's a modern term that he's. So it sounds like he's saying, that's why people called it that. Well, I don't know that anybody called it that, but that they didn't have to, because that's what the idea meant. The resurrection wasn't a revivification of a corpse. It was a deification, and so that happens when you go up. So I agree with that. The problem is that our authors, of course, are living. Our earliest author is Paul, and he's writing a couple decades after the event, and Mark is probably writing about 4 decades after the event. And I'm not sure that either one of them has that view. The reason I hesitate on Mark is because Mark says that they're to go to Galilee because Jesus will appear to them there. Now, it may mean that Jesus has gone up and he's going to come back down to see you. It could be that. And maybe that's what Paul thinks too. But he clearly says that he was raised on the third day and that he appeared to Cephas and then to the 12. And so it doesn't sound like he's going up and down. You could argue that he's going up and down because Paul does say that then last of all, he appeared to me. And he seems to be assuming that it's in the same way as he appeared to the others. Well, Paul's is 2 or 3 years later, so it clearly wasn't the same. Jesus wasn't hanging around until then, and so maybe Paul does think that he's going up and down. That's a good question, and maybe Mark does too. The one thing that I'll say is that in the Gospel of John does assume that it's going to be back on earth and then ascend. The only ascension, actual reference to an ascension, literal, like of it happening, is in the book of Acts. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John don't narrate an ascension. And so what is often thought is that Jesus died. His disciples thought he got raised from the dead, which meant that he was taken all the way up. Then one of the evidence of the resurrection was the appearances. And so they started thinking, well, he was around for a while before he went up. Luke has him around for 40 days, and then he goes up, and then Luke narrates him going up. It is interesting, though, that that's in the book of Acts. In the Gospel of Luke, written by the same guy, Jesus meets the disciples on the day he gets raised from the dead. And then he goes up that day. And so Luke appears to have both traditions.